The rain hammered against the glass lobby of the luxury apartment building in Victoria Island as Grace Williams kicked the frail woman toward the exit. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor with cold determination. "Please, Grace," Helen whispered, clutching her small suitcase. "Just let me call Marcus." "No." Grace's voice echoed through the opulent lobby. "I'm done playing nursemaid to you. You've ruined my relationship long enough." The security guard watched in shock as Grace abandoned the wheelchair-bound woman in the lobby and strutted back to the elevator, her conscience apparently as empty as her heart. But what Grace didn't know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because Helen wasn't who she appeared to be. If you want to know how this story ends and see Grace get exactly what she deserves, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. And drop a comment right now telling us where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. 3 months earlier, Grace Williams was living what she thought was her dream life. At 28, she commanded a corner office at one of Lagos' most prestigious marketing firms. Her designer wardrobe cost more than most people's cars, and her penthouse apartment in Victoria Island was the envy of everyone who saw it. But Grace's most prized possession wasn't material. It was her fiancé, Marcus Thompson. At 32, Marcus was everything she wanted. Successful, handsome, and most importantly, he enhanced her image. As a renowned architect whose buildings dotted the Lagos landscape, he was the perfect accessory to her carefully curated life. Grace measured everything by how it looked to others. Her Instagram followers, her designer bags, her restaurant choices, everything had to scream success. She had clawed her way up from humble beginnings in Surulere, and she was determined never to look back. That's why when Marcus sat her down one evening in their marble-floored living room, his next words shattered her perfect world. "Grace, I need to tell you something important," Marcus said, his usually confident voice trembling slightly. "My mother, she's had an accident. She can't walk anymore, and she has nowhere else to go. She needs to stay with us for a while." Grace felt her carefully constructed world tilt. "Your mother? But I thought she lived in..." She was renting a small place in Ikeja, but she can't manage the stairs anymore. The doctors say she might never walk again. Marcus reached for Grace's manicured hand. "I know this isn't ideal, but she's family. She raised me alone after my father died. I can't abandon her now." Grace's smile felt like plastic on her face. "Of course, baby. Family first, right?" But inside, she was calculating. How would this look to her friends? How would she explain having an old, disabled woman cramping her style? "It'll just be temporary," Marcus assured her, misreading her expression. "Just until we can find her a suitable place with proper care." Grace nodded, already planning how to minimize the damage to her image. Helen Thompson arrived on a Tuesday morning that Grace would remember forever. As the elevator doors opened, Grace watched Marcus wheel in a small, frail woman who looked nothing like the vibrant person she'd expected to meet. Helen was 55 but appeared older, her once strong frame now seeming broken and vulnerable. She wore simple clothes, a faded blue dress and comfortable shoes that had seen better days. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back simply, and her eyes, though kind, held a sadness that made Grace uncomfortable. "Grace, this is my mother, Helen," Marcus said warmly. "Mom, this is Grace, the woman I'm going to marry." Helen's face lit up despite her obvious pain. "Grace, I've heard so much about you. Thank you for opening your home to me. I know this isn't easy." Grace forced her practiced smile. "Welcome to our home, Mrs. Thompson. I've prepared the guest room for you." But even as she spoke the right words, Grace was already calculating the inconvenience. The guest room was where she did her morning yoga. Where would she put her exercise equipment? How would she explain this to Janet, her sister, when she came for their weekly gossip sessions? The first week wasn't so bad. Marcus was home, doting on his mother, helping her with meals, and ensuring she had everything she needed. Helen was quiet, grateful for every small kindness, and tried to stay out of Grace's way. But Grace noticed things that irritated her. Helen's medical equipment cluttered the perfect apartment. The home health aide who came twice a week disrupted Grace's routine. Worst of all, Helen's presence meant Grace couldn't entertain the way she was used to. When her friend Kemi visited for brunch, she couldn't help but comment, "Grace, I didn't know you were caring for someone now." "How kind of you." The word, kind, felt like mockery to Grace's ears. Everything changed when Marcus had to travel to Abuja for a month-long project. Suddenly, Grace found herself alone with Helen, and her true character began to emerge like a virus breaking through a weak immune system. It started small. When Helen asked for help reaching her medication, Grace would take her time, finishing her phone call or her skincare routine first. When Helen requested warm meals, Grace would serve yesterday's leftovers, cold from the refrigerator. "Grace, could you help me get to the bathroom?" Helen would call from her room. "In a minute." Grace would shout back, then deliberately take 20 minutes to finish whatever she was doing. Helen never complained. She would wait patiently, sometimes struggling to manage on her own rather than ask again. But Grace saw this patience as weakness, not dignity. The breaking point came when Grace discovered that Marcus had been sending monthly payments for Helen's medical expenses, money that Grace felt should have gone toward their wedding fund. 800,000 naira a month. Grace screamed at Helen one afternoon, waving the bank statement. "Do you have any idea what we could do with that money? That's our future you're stealing." Helen's voice remained steady despite the attack. "Grace, I never asked Marcus for that money. I told him I could manage." "Manage? You can't even manage to get yourself a glass of water. You're nothing but dead weight in this house, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise." For the first time since arriving, Helen's composure cracked slightly. "I understand you're frustrated, but this is temporary. I'm working with my doctors to—" "Temporary?" Grace laughed bitterly. "It's been 4 months. When exactly is this temporary arrangement going to end?" The confrontation that would change everything happened on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Grace had returned from a particularly stressful day at work. A major client had questioned her focus, suggesting she seemed distracted lately. She found Helen in the living room, slowly making her way from her wheelchair to the couch, trying to retrieve a book that had fallen. The sight of Helen struggling in Grace's pristine living space was the last straw. "That's it!" Grace exploded. "I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this, with you. With this situation ruining everything I've worked for." Helen looked up, startled by the venom in Grace's voice. "Grace, what's wrong? Did something happen at work? What's wrong? You're what's wrong? You've been here for months, turning my home into some kind of medical facility. My friends whisper about me now. My work is suffering because I'm constantly worried about you. Marcus chose you over me, and I'm done. Grace, please calm down. Let's talk about this when—" "No. We're talking now." Grace's voice had reached a dangerous pitch. "You're going to pack your little bag, and you're going to leave. Tonight. Right now." Helen's face went pale. "Grace, it's raining outside, and it's getting late. Can't we discuss this in the morning when Marcus—" "Marcus isn't here. And when he gets back, you won't be either." What happened next would haunt Grace for months to come, though not in the way she expected. With cold efficiency, Grace went to Helen's room and began throwing clothes into a suitcase. Helen followed, pleading, trying to reason with her. "Grace, I have nowhere to go at this hour. Please, just let me stay until morning." "Should have thought of that before you decided to make yourself comfortable in my home," Grace snapped, not looking at Helen as she roughly packed the older woman's few belongings. Grace called the building's security. "This is Grace Williams in the penthouse. I need you to help remove someone from my apartment. She's no longer welcome here." Helen sat in her wheelchair, dignity intact even as her world crumbled around her. "Grace, I want you to know that I don't blame you for this. I understand you're under pressure. But please, just call Marcus. Marcus will understand when I explain how you manipulated him." Grace cut her off. As they reached the ground floor, Grace felt a surge of relief mixed with something she refused to acknowledge as guilt. The marble lobby of their exclusive building felt like a stage for her final performance. "You can wait here for a taxi," Grace announced to the security guard, loud enough for Helen to hear. "Make sure she doesn't try to come back up." Helen looked up at Grace one last time. "I hope someday you understand what you're doing tonight." Grace met her gaze with steel in her eyes. "I understand perfectly. I'm finally putting myself first." And with that, Grace turned and walked back to the elevator, leaving Helen sitting in the lobby with nothing but a small suitcase and the sound of rain against the glass doors. Grace slept better that night than she had in months. For the first time since Helen's arrival, she had her space back, her routine back, her life back. She awoke feeling vindicated and free. But her satisfaction lasted exactly 12 hours. At 8 a.m. the next morning, Grace heard Marcus's key in the door. He wasn't supposed to be back from Abuja for another week, but there he was, and his face told a story that made Grace's blood run cold. "Where is she?" Marcus's voice was quiet, but there was a dangerous edge to it that Grace had never heard before. "Marcus, you're home early. I was going to call you. Where is my mother?" Grace straightened her shoulders, ready to defend her actions. "I sent her away. Marcus, we need to talk about boundaries. She was taking over our lives." Marcus held up his phone, and Grace's world tilted. On the screen was a video message, and she could see herself in it, kicking Helen out into the rain, her voice sharp and cruel as she told the security guard that Helen was no longer welcome. "She sent me this last night," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "Everything, Grace. Every cruel word, every moment of you treating my mother like garbage. She recorded it all." Grace's mouth went dry. "Marcus, you don't understand. She was manipulating you. Stop." Marcus's voice cut through her excuses like a blade. "Just stop." But before Grace could process what was happening, she heard the sound that would change everything, the hum of an expensive car engine outside their building. Marcus looked out the window and smiled for the first time since arriving. "She's here. She." Grace rushed to the window and nearly fainted at what she saw. Stepping out of a brand-new Range Rover Sport was Helen Thompson. But this wasn't the frail, wheelchair-bound woman Grace had abandoned in the lobby. This Helen walked with confidence and purpose, dressed in an elegant business suit that probably cost more than Grace's monthly salary. Grace watched in growing horror as Helen handed her car keys to the building's valet, a service Grace didn't even know existed, and walked through the lobby like she owned it. "That's impossible," Grace whispered. "She can't walk. She's disabled. The elevator dinged, and Helen Thompson entered their apartment. But this wasn't the Helen that Grace had known. This woman commanded the room with her presence. "Hello, Grace," Helen said calmly, her voice carrying an authority that made Grace take an involuntary step backward. Grace stared at Helen, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. You can walk. You were faking it." Helen smiled, and it wasn't the gentle, patient smile Grace remembered. This smile belonged to someone who had just won a very important game. "I wasn't faking anything, Grace. I was testing something." "Testing?" Grace's voice came out as a squeak. Helen walked to the living room and sat down in what had been her chair, except now she sat with the confidence of someone who owned everything in sight. "Let me introduce myself properly," Helen said. "My name is Helen Thompson, and I'm the former owner of Thompson Medical Group, a chain of private clinics across West Africa that I sold 5 years ago for approximately $47 million. Grace felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Helen continued as if she were discussing the weather. I own properties in Victoria Island, Ikoyi, and Lekki. I have investment portfolios across 3 continents. And for the past 4 months, I've been living in your home, testing your character. That's impossible, Grace whispered. Helen reached into her elegant handbag and pulled out a tablet. With a few swipes, she showed Grace newspaper headlines: Local nurse builds medical empire, Thompson Clinics sold in record deal, Lagos businesswoman retires at 50. You see, Grace, I made a promise to myself after Marcus's last relationship ended badly. I decided that any woman who wanted to marry my son would have to pass a test. A test of character. Grace's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto her designer couch. The wheelchair, the medical equipment, all borrowed from one of my clinics. The accident that supposedly left me disabled never happened. Dr. Williams, my old friend and business partner, helped me create the perfect cover story. Marcus, who had been silent through this revelation, finally spoke. Grace, my mother has been testing every serious girlfriend I've had for the past 3 years. The last one lasted 2 months before showing her true colors. You lasted 4. That's actually a record. Helen nodded approvingly. I wanted to see how you would treat someone you perceived as weak, dependent, and burdensome. I wanted to know if you would care for family in times of need. But you lied to me. Grace found her voice, though it cracked with the strain. I acted a role, Helen corrected. Just like you acted the role of a caring fiancé when Marcus was home. But when you thought no one was watching, when you thought there were no consequences, you showed me exactly who you are. Grace looked between Marcus and Helen, seeing her carefully constructed life crumbling around her. Marcus, you have to understand. I was under pressure. I was trying to protect our relationship by throwing my mother out in the rain. Marcus's voice was ice cold. Grace, I watched that video. I saw how you treated her when you thought I wasn't looking. That's not the woman I fell in love with. That's not who I really am. Helen leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Isn't it? Grace, character isn't who you are when people are watching. Character is who you are when you think no one will ever know. Grace felt panic rising in her chest. Her career, her reputation, her future, everything was slipping away. What do you want from me? Helen was quiet for a long moment, studying Grace with the intensity of someone who had built a business empire from nothing. I'm going to give you a choice, Grace. You can walk away right now. Marcus will not pursue you for any of the wedding expenses he's already paid. I will not share the video of your behavior beyond what was necessary to show my son who you really are. You can go back to your life and pretend this never happened. Grace felt a flicker of hope. Or, Helen continued, you can prove that you're capable of change. What do you mean? Helen stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Lagos. I still run a charity clinic in Mushin. We care for elderly patients who have nowhere else to go. Many of them are genuinely disabled, genuinely dependent, genuinely vulnerable, everything you thought I was. Grace waited, sensing that her entire future hung on Helen's next words. Spend 6 months working at that clinic. Not as a volunteer who shows up for photos and leaves. Work there. Care for people who have nothing to offer you in return. Learn what it means to serve someone other than yourself. And if I do that, if you complete those 6 months with genuine dedication and compassion, and I'll know if you're faking it, then I'll consider forgiving you. More than that, I'll help you start your own business. My connections, my resources, my investment capital. Grace's mind raced. 6 months in Mushin, working with elderly patients, probably for no pay. It would destroy her image, ruin her social standing. But the alternative was losing everything anyway. And Marcus? Grace asked quietly. Helen and Marcus exchanged a look that told Grace everything she needed to know. "You and I are over," he said gently but firmly. "What you did. I can't come back from that, Grace. But if you do this, if you really change, then maybe we can part as friends instead of enemies." Grace looked around the penthouse that would no longer be her home, at the life that would no longer be hers, at the man she had lost through her own cruelty. Pride warred with desperation in her chest. Everything in her wanted to refuse, to storm out with her dignity intact. But as she looked at Helen, this woman who had turned the tables so completely, Grace realized she had no dignity left to protect. "Fine," Grace whispered. "I'll do it." Helen nodded as if she had expected this response. "Good. You start Monday morning. Dr. Williams will orient you to the facility. Your first patient is Mrs. Adebayo. She's 78, has dementia, and no family. She'll be an excellent teacher." As Grace packed her bags for the second time in 2 days, she couldn't help but ask, "Why? Why are you giving me this chance when I treated you so horribly?" Helen paused in the doorway. "Because, Grace, I was once a young woman who thought success meant stepping on others to get ahead. The difference is, I learned better before I hurt someone I loved. You're getting the education I wish someone had given me when I was your age." The Thompson Charity Clinic in Mushin was everything Grace's penthouse was not. The floors were clean but worn, the walls were painted institutional green, and the smell of antiseptic couldn't quite mask the underlying odors of age and illness. Dr. Williams, a gentleman in his 60s who had worked with Helen for decades, showed Grace around on her first day. "This is Mrs. Adebayo," he said, leading Grace to a small woman sitting by a window. She was a university professor before the dementia. Some days she remembers everything. Other days. He shrugged sadly. Mrs. Adebayo looked up at Grace with cloudy eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "Are you here to help us, dear?" Grace forced a smile. "Yes, ma'am." The first week was torture. Grace had never changed adult diapers, never fed someone who couldn't hold a spoon, never dealt with the reality of bodies that were failing. She went home each night to her small rental apartment in Yaba and cried from exhaustion and disgust. But something began to change in the second month. Mrs. Adebayo, on one of her good days, grabbed Grace's hand as she was leaving. "You know, dear, I can see the sadness in your eyes. What happened to you?" Without meaning to, Grace found herself telling Mrs. Adebayo everything. About Helen, about Marcus, about how her cruelty had cost her everything. Mrs. Adebayo listened patiently, then patted Grace's hand. "Pain is a teacher, child. But only if you're willing to learn from it." It happened in the 4th month, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Grace arrived at the clinic to find Mrs. Adebayo's bed empty. "She passed peacefully in her sleep," Dr. Williams told Grace gently. Her heart just stopped. Grace stared at the empty bed, feeling something crack open in her chest. This woman who had shown her kindness despite having every reason to be bitter, who had shared her wisdom freely, who had treated Grace like a daughter, was gone. On Mrs. Adebayo's nightstand was a folded letter with Grace's name on it. "My dear Grace, if you are reading this, then I have gone ahead to prepare the way, as my husband used to say. I want you to know that these months watching you care for me and the others here have brought me more joy than I've felt in years. When you first arrived, I could see the hardness in your heart. You moved like someone carrying stones. But day by day, I watched those stones fall away. I watched you learn to see us not as burdens, but as human beings with stories worth hearing. The young woman who feeds Mr. Okafor his breakfast every morning, who braids Mrs. Okoro's hair, who sits with Mr. Bello during his panic attacks, that young woman has a beautiful soul. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Your friend in this life and the next, Professor Margaret Adebayo." Grace collapsed into the chair beside the empty bed and wept, not the angry, frustrated tears she had cried those first weeks, but deep, cleansing tears of grief and gratitude. Helen visited the clinic for the first time in Grace's 5th month. She found Grace in the common room, leading a group sing-along with patients who barely remembered their own names but could still recall every word of old Yoruba folk songs. Grace looked up and saw Helen watching from the doorway. For a moment, their eyes met, and Helen nodded approvingly. After the sing-along, they walked outside to the clinic's small garden. "How are you doing, Grace?" Grace considered the question seriously. "I'm different. I wake up every morning thinking about Mrs. Okoro's arthritis or whether Mr. Bello remembered to take his medication. 6 months ago, I woke up thinking about which designer bag matched my shoes." Helen smiled. "And how does that feel?" "Exhausting," Grace admitted. "But also meaningful. These people trust me with their most vulnerable moments. They let me see them at their weakest, and they still treat me with kindness. I never understood that before." Helen was quiet for a moment, studying Grace's face. "You seem lighter somehow. When you first came to the clinic, you carried yourself like someone bearing a heavy burden." Grace nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Someone once told me I carried stones in my heart. I think those stones were all the people I stepped on to get ahead. All the kindness I refused to show because I thought it made me weak." Helen was quiet for a moment. "Grace, I have a confession to make. I've been getting reports from Dr. Williams every week. About your progress, your attitude, how you interact with the patients." Grace tensed, wondering if this was another test. "You've exceeded every expectation I had," Helen said softly. "The way you care for these patients, the genuine compassion you show, it's remarkable." Grace looked around the garden at the elderly patients sitting in the shade, some napping, others chatting quietly. "They've taught me so much about what really matters in life." Helen nodded slowly. "That, my dear, is wisdom." 2 years later, Grace Williams stood in front of a modest office building in Surulere, watching as workers installed the sign, "Adebayo Home Care Services, Dignity in Every Day." Helen had been true to her word. Not only had she forgiven Grace, but she had become her business partner and mentor. The home care service Grace had built provided in-home assistance to elderly patients across Lagos, allowing them to maintain their independence while receiving the care they needed. Grace's approach was revolutionary in Lagos's healthcare landscape. Instead of treating elderly care as a burden, her service emphasized dignity, companionship, and genuine human connection. Her staff was trained not just in medical care, but in seeing each patient as someone's beloved parent, grandparent, or friend. The business was thriving, but more importantly, Grace was thriving. She still lived simply. Her apartment in Yaba was comfortable but not luxurious. She drove a reliable car, wore practical clothes, and measured her success not in Instagram followers but in the letters she received from grateful families. Every Tuesday evening, Grace had dinner with Helen at her mansion in Ikoyi. It had become their tradition, a time for Grace to seek advice and for Helen to share the wisdom that came from building an empire and then learning that true wealth lay elsewhere. "I have news," Helen announced one Tuesday evening over jollof rice and grilled fish. "Good news or bad news?" Helen grinned. "Depends on your perspective. Marcus is getting married next month." Grace felt a tiny pang, not of regret, but of nostalgia for who she had been when loving Marcus seemed like the most important thing in the world. "I'm happy for him," Grace said, and meant it. "Is she nice?" "She's wonderful. A pediatric doctor who volunteers at children's hospitals in her free time. She passed my test with flying colors, spent 3 months caring for me without a single complaint." Grace laughed. "You're terrible, you know that? How many future daughters-in-law have you put through this?" "Just 3. Marcus's current fiancée, you, and one other woman who lasted exactly 2 weeks before suggesting I'd be more comfortable in a nursing home." Grace shook her head in amazement. "I can't believe I actually threw you out in the rain." Neither can I, frankly. But you know what? That night was the making of you. You needed to lose everything to find out who you really were underneath all that armor you'd built up. Grace nodded thoughtfully. Mrs. Adebayo used to say that our worst moments can become our greatest teachers, if we let them. Helen raised her glass of red wine. To Mrs. Adebayo, then. And to second chances. To second chances, Grace agreed, clinking her glass against Helen's. And that's the incredible true story of how one woman's cruelest moment became her greatest opportunity for redemption. Grace thought she was throwing out a burden, but she was really throwing away the chains that had been holding her back from becoming her best self. What did you think of Grace's transformation? Do you believe people can really change, or do you think Helen gave her too much of a second chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories that will restore your faith in human nature. And ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Remember, sometimes our darkest moments are just the beginning of our brightest transformations. Until next time, treat everyone with kindness. You never know who might be testing your character.